Brent, good afternoon, everyone, members of the township and stakeholders. It's my pleasure to be here with you this afternoon. Hope you're all doing well. With us today, as Brent mentioned, we've got Matt Alexander, who's going to be reporting on the sort of commercial space study as well as intensification, and John Taziopoulos, who's going to be presenting the corridor study. And the intent of the meeting, next slide, Matt, is to walk you through a bit about the process, where we are in the work program, and then really get into sort of highlights of the three studies. The intent today is for us to share this information with you and for you to share comments, concerns, questions with us so we can respond. And just to note, if there's a question or concern that we can't respond to today, we will certainly do our best to get back to you in a timely manner, because it is important to obviously ensure that you have a response and to keep the conversation going. And again, because we've got, well, now about an hour and 45 minutes, the intent is to answer as many questions and have a discussion as best we can. And if there's any follow-up conversations that you'd like to have, we're also happy to do that. Next slide, Matt. So as I mentioned, we want to certainly give you an idea of where we are in the official plan review process, and understanding that as part of this process that there were three studies that we had to prepare: the population-related employment market study, the one that I called commercial space, which was obviously incorrect, the intensification study or strategy, and the Bayfield corridor study. And again, we need to get input from all of you as well as members of the public tonight and over the next couple of weeks, just to make sure that we're not missing anything, and that we're moving forward on the same page. Next slide, please. So for those of you who've been sort of following the process, the program has been separated into two different phases. One is sort of the preparatory work, which involved sort of creating a communication strategy and how our team was to engage not only with internal township staff, but also council, and then also stakeholders like yourselves, and then the members of the public, and how we were going to do that. We undertook visioning workshops to really understand, so what is the vision for the municipality? What should the official plan capture as part of this, and what are some of the issues that should be addressed as part of this official plan process? There was a growth management strategy that was prepared and a discussion paper that sort of addressed growth in the municipality and various issues that should have been studied in a bit more detail. There was a public open house and also a Section 26 public meeting, which is sort of the formal kickoff to the official plan process, outlining the next process that we were following, which is part of phase 2, as well as identifying sort of all the issues that will need to be addressed as part of this official plan process, including the three studies we're here today to talk about. So we're right essentially while we are early on in phase 2, we've made significant progress in preparing three background reports. Once we prepare these background reports, we're obviously taking input today. We're going to be taking input this evening as part of a public session. We've already presented to council, and we're also going to consider and revise the background reports based on input received, so that we could go back to council and sort of finalize these before we move forward in drafting the official plan. Once the official plan is drafted, we'll move forward to additional meetings, including an open house. Consider any input through that with yourselves as well as members of the public, revise the official plan, and then move forward with a statutory public meeting, and then looking forward to council adoption at the end of this year. Next slide, please. And now I'm going to turn this over to Matt. Matt's going to present the population-related employment market study, which was prepared by Watson and Associates, but we're going to do our best to provide the highlights of that. We're then going to move forward with the intensification strategy that Matt's going to present. And the intent of these two are really to understand what's available. So how much land is needed to accommodate sort of population-related employment uses. And then how much land is needed and how much land is available. As part of the intensification strategy, the intent is to talk about how much intensification is needed to be accommodated, where is it going to go, and if and how much land might be needed to accommodate that. And then the corridor study is really sort of to demonstrate sort of a test scenario. It's not to show what will happen. It's to talk about what could happen. And how it could be tested. So, what could be accommodated based on these two particular studies at the outset of the presentation. And with that, Matt, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Greg. So the population-related employment market study had a number of purposes and objectives to assess if there was an adequate amount of designated land to accommodate the population-related employment growth that's projected in Springwater to 2031. The PRE lands refer to lands with a mixed use, commercial, or institutional land use designation. And that represents approximately 75% of all employment lands within the township. It provides direction on the types of commercial and institutional uses anticipated over the planning horizon, as well as the urban settlement area. And the other purpose and objective is to identify the magnitude of commercial growth that can be expected in a more long-term time frame beyond 2031, based on the anticipated build out of the Midhurst secondary plan area and the greenfield lands. Some market considerations in this analysis include the commercial potential in Elmvale, which is primarily related to tourism and visitors and serving the population beyond the township. The high vacancy rate, which is approximately 17% in commercial properties. A healthy vacancy rate, for reference, is approximately between 5% and 10%, so 17% is fairly high. Another consideration is that the vacant space is primarily concentrated in the downtown area of Elmvale and within the Midhurst Bayfield corridor. Proximity to an established retail base within the city of Barrie was a key consideration, and a significant outflow of local spending. And population-related employment represents the largest employment sector of the local employment base, so that's an important factor to consider as well. PRE demand, this gives you a snapshot of PRE demand. The township of Springwater has approximately 233,000 square feet of occupied retail and service commercial space, and approximately 48,000 square feet of vacant retail space. It's anticipated that by 2031, there will be enough population to support 286,000 square feet of commercial space in Midhurst and 62,000 square feet of commercial space within Elmvale. So looking at the population forecast and the amount of commercial space that's available, there is some additional need when we look to the end of the planning horizon in 2031. The total land requirement to accommodate PRE uses by 2031 then is approximately 60 hectares, which is less than the designated land vacant supply of approximately 156 hectares. The commercial space demand anticipated within Midhurst, for example, is more than 4 times the existing occupied commercial space. And so what that means is that there is a surplus and a need to sort of utilize those underutilized spaces. So I'm going to go into the intensification strategy because this really speaks to how we're going to help fill that space and support those local businesses, as well as meeting the higher order intensification targets that are mandated by the province and the county. So the purpose and objectives of the draft intensification strategy are to confirm the residential intensification opportunities for meeting the requirements of the County of Simcoe official plan. So we've identified strategic growth areas. We've investigated the ability of the township to service and facilitate development of these strategic growth areas. The purpose is also to support opportunities for intensification in general, so sort of a broad idea of intensification throughout the township, and to determine general policies, principles, and concepts for massing and urban design, specifically within the intensification areas. And that's what the corridor study is really about. And to assist the community, and to assist with community engagement to better understand the shift to a more compact built form and a more diverse range and mix of housing options resulting from achieving higher rates of intensification. So that's the purpose of doing this kind of a strategy ahead of the proposed official plan policies and zoning bylaw and urban design guidelines and all that stuff, is to sort of set the basis for this is why and how we're taking this approach. We're also looking to confirm the residential, to summarize the Simcoe official plan requirements. There is a requirement for 15% intensification over the life of the official plan. This does not include the lands outside of the built boundary. And it's important to remember that moving forward with the implementation of the new growth plan, the township will only be able to direct intensification towards the red areas. That development is the only development that would count towards the intensification targets that are required by the new growth plan. So we prepared this map to give you a sense of what that really looks like. So the yellow areas are considered undelineated built boundaries. And the red areas are the delineated built boundaries. And essentially, the growth plan directs that to meet the intensification targets, only the red areas count. So this is the southern portion of the township. The next slide is going to be the northern portion. And the numbers represent the number of units that can be accommodated within areas that are designated for residential development within each of these areas. So you can see that the undelineated built boundary areas have a significantly larger amount of land available for residential development. And that presents a bit of an issue in terms of achieving those intensification targets. So here's the northern portion, and again we see the same issue. Elmvale is identified as the delineated built boundary area and has less available land designated for residential development. So the purpose of the intensification strategy is to increase the supply of land within those delineated built boundaries so that we can achieve those targets. And that's just a little bit more context on this. So the 2018 growth management strategy that we prepared projects a need to accommodate 777 units through intensification in particular to 2031. Currently, the Elmvale and Midhurst areas have supply for 77 units within those intensification areas. One of the ways of achieving this would be through additional dwelling units or secondary units, basement apartments or accessory suites. That can assist in increasing the supply depending on the take-up, but it's not necessarily a long-term permanent amount of new development. So the intensification strategy identifies Midhurst as the focus for providing that additional supply of 700 units that's required. And that's based on the servicing capacity there, the land availability, vacant and underutilized lands. It's a strategic growth location, and it helps to implement growth plan direction and to anticipate needs identified by the county municipal comprehensive review. Our intensification strategy then has a number of policy considerations and key takeaways. So to summarize, we've identified the Bayfield corridor in Midhurst as a strategic growth area within the township to focus intensification. We established policies that encourage and facilitate gentle intensification through the redevelopment of existing low-density properties. So areas where there might be very wide residential lands or deep lands that could consolidate or be redeveloped. We're recommending some policy tweaks that could help support that. We established policies to provide a framework for the division of estate residential lots where servicing exists and within settlement areas, so where it's appropriate. Establish the policies of Midhurst transitional residential designation to permit a greater variety of housing types in single detached dwellings only. And we recommend ways of providing financial or regulatory incentives for intensification. And of course, all of that can be read in more detail in the intensification strategy itself. So I'll pass it along to John Tassiopoulos to speak about the Bayfield corridor study next.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me well, Matt. Yeah, it's all good. First and foremost, thank you for attending this today. Just very, very quickly, and we're going to run through this as Greg was saying, so we can give you more time to provide some questions and ask us about the work that we've provided. But I just wanted to go over just quickly the purpose and objectives of the corridor study. You'll see the first sort of bullet we've talked about is to support the major intersection at Bayfield, Snow Valley, and Finley Mill Road. And the reason is to establishing that community focus that supports a community hub within that particular intersection. We also know there's servicing there, so there are all sorts of things that come together. But that's sort of the initial idea in terms of where some things would be focused. The other criteria were that we were trying to identify land uses that would be appropriate for a high order community focus area along Bayfield, because it is a long corridor. We're talking about looking at an overall area of almost 4 kilometers. So starting to identify what would be the most appropriate within that area. So although we're looking at the corridor as a whole, how do we deal with it in terms of its sections? The other was to just identify in very general terms the time horizons to achieve the vision of the corridor. Figuring out ways of how we could accommodate a mix of retail, commercial, and residential uses that are pedestrian scaled, and also start to introduce a much more robust sort of active transportation kind of a section that, really supports and enhances the experience of pedestrians and cyclists. I understand when you look at the corridor now, the way you see it, it's a little bit hard to imagine how that would work, especially in terms of the vehicular activity. But I'm hoping by the end I'll be able to provide you sort of a concept. And always remember that we're looking down the road, and we're trying to create that framework for this type of work. The other is to establish appropriate intensification and higher density development forms. Now, what you're going to see is a very modest approach to intensification along Bayfield, but we just wanted to test to make sure that we could meet intensification requirements. Matt just finished talking about the requirement for another 700 units, just to be able to show that could that easily be accommodated within, not just within Bayfield, but within sort of the focus area that I talked about earlier. Another objective was, to consolidate and limit the number of vehicular access locations. So what I mean, very simply, the number of driveways coming right off of Bayfield that start to impact sort of a continuity along Bayfield, and at the same time interrupts this idea of creating this more urban road section. And then the idea would be, and this is going to happen more so as we get comments back and get more input, is to further develop the urban design guidelines that are specific to the corridor. The secondary plan for Midhurst does have general guidelines for the corridor area. But what we're trying to do is get to the point where we're showing something more specific to what we're proposing and to the future vision for the corridor itself. Next one, Matt. So just to give you an idea, what we had done is we'd broken down the corridor into 3 character areas, and they're separated. Generally, the way we identify is they were either separated by environmental features, and that's how we sort of blocked out what was available to sort of take a look at. And we were also looking at sort of, when we looked at the overall area, how we could break it down into more digestible sort of parts. And we sort of broken that down into 9 sub areas that you see by letters. But what you see at either the southern end, the Bayfield South character area, or the Bayfield North character area, are quite at a distance from what would be the focal area. If you just want to click on that, Matt. So that's sort of the more focused Bayfield Center character area within the overall corridor itself. And then we go into the focal point, which is what I mentioned earlier. If you can click on that, Matt, which shows areas B, C, and D, which we'll go into a little bit of more detail, but also includes the future vision for a community hub and recreational center, where you see the letter A right at the intersection there, sort of completing that intersection. So what I want to make sure that we get across is that the idea behind the study is for it to be a forward-looking document and to provide a framework that can be used with Midhurst Secondary Plan with its the mixed use designation that was established by the Midhurst Secondary Plan. And more so, when I was going through it was to test to see how the corridor itself could develop over an extended period of time. Again, what you're going to see are pretty modest proposals in terms of development, but the idea would be that we can at least meet the future requirements of Midhurst through much more modest development. And if we can get more robust type of development or higher density, then all that stuff are bonuses over time. Next one, Matt. So how do we analyze this? And there are obviously quite a few assumptions we have to make when we're trying to create a vision for the corridor itself. So, we set out by noting that lands within the corridor would be designated as mixed use commercial as per the secondary plan. We would, as I said, in terms of modest development, we would look at what could be established and what could be generated by only using 4-story heights. Now, the secondary plan does allow up to 6. I would suggest that there's the opportunity much further down the road in the future for it to be much higher, considering how wide that corridor is and how you start to frame pedestrian areas. But for now, in the near term, what we're looking at is something much more modest to be able to do an analysis of the concepts. We're looking at most of the parking to be provided at grade in the near term. I know the desire is always to provide the parking below grade, but we're also trying to take into consideration the realities of market in the area and how that would work. The apartment gross floor area average is large, and therefore it's conservative in terms of its unit yield. So we're using about 100 square meters for those who don't understand that it's a little over 1,000 square feet, and that's again a gross floor area. So depending on the development, that's anywhere from 800 square feet and up. And the other thing we're trying to do, because we are talking about this as a mixed-use commercial area, we're trying to also just get a sense in general terms what the job yield would be. And we used a pretty conservative approach to how we were applying the overall sort of the average based on the square footage of the gross floor area, square meters of the proposed developments. And again, when we're looking at the corridor, we were specifically looking at the corridor edge. So the lot depths coming off of Bayfield. We weren't going any further into the community. We were only looking at the corridor itself. The only area that has the deeper lots is Area D, which are, for those of you who might know the areas, the Curry Truck Lands, and there are a couple of other properties that are within. Those are the only ones that are quite deep, but the rest were all pretty much in the 75 to 100 meter depth, which is quite a depth. But and that's why there was also no need to go any further. There's quite an abundant amount of depth to deal with along the corridor as it is. And then everyone's favorite in terms of for planning, not forgetting our planning requirements, is to ensure there's a 5% park space requirement accounted for in any of the concepts that we did. So resulting in this, when we're doing the analysis, what we discovered is just in the areas, as I mentioned, the B, C, and D, so those are the intersection blocks themselves, those alone generated close to 950 residential units. And basically meaning that all of the intensification could be accommodated within those 4 areas that we've identified, and that it would generate between 1,700 and 1,800 people, and about, which is quite a lot of retail square footage of 250,000, or about 23,400 square meters, and approximately 380 jobs based on that. So that's related all to the mixed use commercial and what that retail would generate. Can I just, I guess the only other thing I wanted to sort of say on this, so as I said, this focuses on only the 4 areas, which, Matt, if you want to go to the next slide, which sort of gives an idea, that the so what you see in blue there are sort of the focus areas, but the area itself goes beyond that. So you'll see some of the other buildings that are conceptual buildings that are shown further either to the south or a little bit to the north. They're still part of that intersection area. And what we were just trying to denote here is at that intersection, we're trying to sort of indicate the almost like gateway buildings. They're a little bit taller than the other. As I was saying, generally we're talking about 4 stories, but we're trying to generate an idea of how conceptually we can emphasize this important, what will be an important intersection into the future, and show how there are like front plaza areas. The idea of envisioning this important intersection that leads into Midhurst and as an important intersection for Springwater, how that might be addressed and faced onto and looked at. So this very conceptually, what we were looking at in terms of that. And you can see from the, we've sort of put a little bit of a screen over, you can sort of see the depths of those particular lots upon which these buildings are located. And the idea behind that is to show that these do have a great depth. These are 4-story low-rise sort of mixed-use apartment buildings, but that you have the space in the back to grow if that's what ends up happening over time. But in the near term, to be able to accommodate parking. Unfortunately, that's that we're taking up great amounts of space for parking, but just to be able to show that this can actually function from this very modest approach to development. Next one, Matt. So when you're trying to talk about what a corridor like that looks like, and I talked to you earlier about that, this is a very long corridor. It's very hard to start to imagine how do you introduce these buildings into this area? How do you introduce active transportation? How do you start to gain a vision that's more thoughtful about the pedestrian and the cyclists? So we're trying to take care of transportation on all those different levels, not just looking at vehicular traffic, but at the same time, how do you maintain that vehicular traffic? So this is very conceptual. It still needs to be discussed, but in order to be able to jump off somewhere, we have to present something to get some input back from. And so what we try to do is to generate, it's a very wide corridor. So it's almost 44 meters in width, which is quite large. But right now it is functioning with the equivalent of 2 drive lanes on either side and with a curved shoulder. But we do know that in that same space, we can accommodate a lot more features, a lot more zones, something that starts to create a much more pedestrian and cycling friendly environment, yet at the same time provide vehicular access and to accommodate what is going on now. So I can just take you really quickly through this. The idea was to create a zone of a pedestrian boulevard zone that you can sort of see. It's mirrored one side onto the other, but you get a sense of a 4-story building with a 4.5 meter at grade sort of retail with a higher floor, and how that relates to 2-meter sidewalk with a street tree and furniture area, then a separated cycling track. Because one of the things we do know is that there are those that might consider cycling, but are definitely afraid of being anywhere near traffic. So one of the things that a lot of our active transportation experts within it, WSP, have been promoting throughout Southern Ontario and other parts of the country is the idea of these separated cycling tracks. And because we've got that width on this corridor, we're able to accommodate this in a very easy manner. And then what we have is we have that added buffer. So we have a street tree, but we can also create a lay-by within that. So you have an interval of parking and street tree planting. So you get this buffer of planting, and you get a buffer of parking along that edge that sort of separates the through traffic from the pedestrian and cycling boulevard. And then we've got a very, very large median, which could easily be reduced. Any of this could easily be adjusted in terms of widths, but in the meantime, how we're looking at it is it would be, the median would be the part of the project, part of the section that would accommodate left turns and also, you know, landscaping and so on. Again, if you sort of see, we've sort of identified that focal character area as where this would run initially, and you know how that would spread out. So the idea is, as you're approaching from the south, or if you're approaching from the north, you know, the complexion of the section changes, and that this is an important and special area within the community. And this would be, as I said, because we're looking at areas A and B, it would be extended further northward. But I was just trying to show how this section would work in this particular area. And I think that's it in terms of, sorry, I know there's a lot to digest. I think the next slide is just where we're at in terms of what we're hoping to get to with this. So the idea is to eventually, after we get the feedback and we finalize the reports, to develop the specific urban design guidelines for the corridor that speak a lot to some of the things that I've already mentioned in presentation, to hopefully generate that urban cross-section and get some feedback on that. The idea would be that, you know, we're ensuring there's green amenity spaces and park spaces provided throughout. We didn't get a chance to show you how we've done that in each of the character areas, but needless to say, I can let you know one of the reasons of breaking down into 9 areas is to be able to understand what would we need in terms of park space if we were to apply the 5%. And when we've done sort of these conceptual demonstrations, we tried to do one of two things. We were linking them where we could to so they could be almost access points to potential trails or to the natural heritage system. And the other thing was to make sure that we had it we had these green spaces at good intervals along the corridor, which would be something that would find its way into the guidelines of ensuring that we're never more than 500 meters away along the corridor. So there's always this, we're generating this cycling and this pedestrian activity. Well, there has to be something to get to, or some respite or some break as we're moving along the corridor. And so the idea is that over time and into the future, we're thinking about how we create these parks that become, and they're small, modest parks or plazas that become part of the overall sort of a circuit of parks or parks that are within Midhurst. The other is to look at how how the land use framework could be, how the plan can be updated, and the secondary plan in order to address the corridor area more fully. There will probably need to be zoning, there will need to be zoning bylaw amendments to allow for permit, to specify permitted uses, as indicated in the Midhurst secondary plan, but also to permit more diverse and dense residential and commercial uses. Because when that secondary plan was done, it was a very different complexion, very different way of thinking about Bayfield, and that's over a decade ago. And but as we see how growth is occurring and where particular growth could could be focused, we start to understand that we need to accommodate probably more development by adjusting some of the zoning requirements to permit more active uses and more residential uses. And when I say that, I don't mean single detached. I mean like more dense residential uses, as we were showing with the mixed use. And finally, we're looking at the importance of the stuff that allows us to build all this stuff, which is the servicing aspect, is how municipal water and wastewater servicing can be expanded to all lots within the corridor. So it has to start from somewhere, and where it makes the most sense and where it's actually most economically feasible to look at that. So typically we know that where there's existing is probably the first place that we can start from. Again, one of the things that I talked about earlier is consolidating driveway access points to the many parcels and try and consolidate them so that we're not sort of interrupting the street at multiple points, but at the same time also not interrupting this idea of creating this more pedestrian-inspired boulevard edge. And finally, provide streetscape and public realm enhancements. As I sort of indicated in that example of the concept for the road section, that supports active transportation and safe separated cycling areas to help encourage and support this idea of having people move in different ways within their community. And I think that's probably it. Just turn it over to Greg, or is it Matt that wants to speak to this last one?
Thanks, John. Appreciate and thanks, Matt. Appreciate the presentations. As we discussed at the outset of the presentation, we want to obviously have any discussion and answer any questions that you may have, and then obviously there's an opportunity to review additional comments through any submissions after the fact. I just noticed this isn't the most updated slide that I had, but the intent is that we want to finalize the background studies that were presented today. Look forward to drafting the OP, continuing our engagement with council, all of you as stakeholders and members of the public. We want to finalize the OP and then move forward to a statutory public meeting and council adoption later this year. Matt, next slide. I think there's more detailed. Okay, that's not the most up to date.
I'll switch over to the PDF.
Okay. So as Matt is doing that, Matt, just let me share my screen. It might be a little bit easier.
I have it.
Yeah, so we're looking at taking comments until about March 12th. If you do have any additional comments other than what's discussed today, please submit that ideally in writing by March 12th, just so we can move on and look to finalize the background reports by March 26th. Looking to draft the OP in July, engaging over the summer, finalizing the OP in the fall, and then, as I mentioned, looking at having a statutory public meeting in December with council adoption as well later that month. I think there's another one. So as part of this discussion today, I'll just turn this back over to Brent and his team, but we're asking you to type your comments or questions into the chat so we could then read them and respond to them. As I mentioned, because you're already providing them today in writing, what we can do is look, if we can't respond to them today, we'll certainly respond to them once we compile all the comments. And like I mentioned, all of these will be recorded and responses will be provided.
Greg, did you want to look at the next step slides? Is that what you're looking for? I think they're the earlier slides of where we are, I think.
No, I think we're good.
Okay.
And I don't know if there's any additional slides after that, Matt.
I thought it might have been before that.
Okay.
Just the thank you slide. Yeah.
Okay, and with that, Brent, I'll turn it back over to you and your team.
Yeah, so I think what I'll do is we'll refer this over to moderator Wanford just to see if we have any comments on this, any chat or any questions that have been submitted in through the chat. The one thing I'd also like to indicate is that as far as the recording for this presentation, this will be sent out again to the ministries and agencies and the stakeholder groups so that they have the presentation in hand. A number of the agencies that had responded to the notification that was sent out had indicated that they were going to provide their comments in writing after further review of the presentation and the content of the presentation. So we will be waiting to receive those comments. So at this point, I'll turn it over to moderator Wanford just to see if we have any questions that have popped up through the chat. Moderator Wanford.
Thank you, Brent. We have no comments or questions.
Sorry, moderator Wanford, the volume was extremely low. Could you please turn that up?
Just bear with me here. Is this better?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So we have no questions or comments received from anyone attending.
Okay, well, on that note, I would like to thank all the attendees for tuning in to the meeting, and planning staff will make sure to accumulate all of the comments that we receive after further circulation of the presentation to the agencies, to the advisory committees, and for anybody viewing right now, if they would like to view tonight, the public stakeholders meeting is scheduled to occur at 6 p.m. At which point I understand that we have approximately 15 to 20 people that are registered to provide comment and ask questions. So again, thank you to WSPN team, and thank you to all the attendees. I hope you enjoy your day.
Thanks very much, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.